Today's essay I want to dive into is quite the hot take. I personally don't think women should work outside of the home anymore, and I'll dive into why I think that is. But before we go too deep, let me give you some context. So, I do come from 9 to 5 world. I used to be a defense contractor, worked in Washington D.C. Did the whole corporate life. Went to college with the expectation of having a certain career. I was, at the first Women's March in Washington, D.C., I was an inaugural founding member of the Wing when it opened in D.C., and if you don't know what that was a women's only social club co-working space. I was a member of a Lean In Circle, which is a program Sheryl Sandberg from Facebook founded, touting her Lean In methodology for women to literally lean in and help each other in their careers. And I actually left a job after I found out that a more junior male coworker was making more than me. So I lay all that out because I was deep into the weeds of feminism up until maybe a year or two ago when my perspective started changing. And I think a lot of women have been lied to about what careers are supposed to be, what feminism is, and this whole idea that it was supposed to liberate us. And I've started taking more of a critical approach to it, and part of that is driven from my own experience. I hated my 9 to 5 jobs. They made me physically ill, mentally ill. Being a single woman living in DC was not easy. I left because I couldn't, at the end of the day, I was going bankrupt. I just couldn't afford to keep living there. The jobs I held were stifling. I hated being a slave to a boss. Dating culture obviously sucks for a lot of people, and so at the time I didn't have anyone to care for. So it's okay, I'm in my late 20s. I'm going to this 9 to 5 job that I hate. I'm paying for a tiny 300 square foot apartment just so I can live in DC, right in the middle of downtown DC, but I can't afford to do anything because I don't have any extra money. I spend all my free time working on side hustles just so I can earn more money so I can eventually leave my job, and I just found myself stuck in this treadmill, and I got totally burned out. And I think a lot of women are in the same loop. That's why we've sought out self-care and yoga classes and all these things to make us feel better, because the reality is the world of work sucks, and men didn't oppress us by keeping us at the home. I think they took one for the team and liberated us from the tyranny of work. So I think we have our priorities mixed up. But this is all to say, I think there's a much bigger problem now, and it's not just so much about the contentment and happiness of women. It's the fact that so many women have bought into this narrative that they've put careers first, and the career is the cornerstone of their identity. And so when AI takes their jobs, and I think it's going to take women's jobs first, because we tend to gravitate towards lower effort jobs. And I've hyperlinked or linked some TikToks and stuff in some of my content on Substack, but pretty much the jobs we're taking are jobs where you can sit by the pool, answer some emails, drink margaritas at 2:00 in the afternoon. We're not doing hard jobs. And I'm not to say your work isn't valuable, but I had time to go grab coffee, and one of our business meetings we would have, I would always we'd go get cookies at Wegmans and things like that. There was time. It wasn't demanding, and part of the reason why I hated it so much was because it wasn't challenging. It was boring as hell, and didn't leverage any of my skills, and I just sat at my desk all day having to pretend to be busy. So it's not to say the jobs women are doing are insignificant. They're just easily automatable. At this point, we don't need any more social media managers or marketing managers, and I swear to God, if one more PR account executive sends me an email, I'm gonna lose my mind. The work you're doing, people are doing, is just totally asinine bullshit. So I think women's work is going to disappear first, alongside, entry-level work and like, white collar, and within like the white collar world. Like, I think there's different groups of people are going to be more affected by AI automation, and I think women are going to be one of those groups of people. So what happens when you take an entire cohort of people who have swapped out their identities, and instead of being mothers and wives and taking pride in that, they're taking pride in careers and education that, to be frank, I don't think is real, and has saddled them with that. And then they have careers that are about to no longer exist, and oh, by the way, these same women have aged out. Their biological clock is rapidly ticking down, so they're not going to have the chance to create families once they decide to do so. So what happens when these women, my generation and Gen Zers, like, we age into our 40s and our 50s and we have nothing? We have no career, no family, no children, like nothing innately valuable, nothing that makes our lives worth living. Like, what are we gonna do? Just keep going to brunch? Keep like are we just gonna live in a world of Sex in the City on loop and on repeat, and it's like Groundhog Day but for women, and we just go to brunch and SoulCycle classes and drink martinis for the rest of our lives? Like, that's not gonna happen, right? Like I hope everyone realizes that at some point, like, that is just, that in and of itself is an oppressive reality. Like, we seek out novelty. That's why social media has been designed the way it is. Like, we seek out novelty and growth, and I don't think like doing the same thing all the time is a recipe for success. And so I think women who are working outside of the home are setting themselves up for failure, because they're banking on a future that doesn't exist, and they're sacrificing the future that they could create for themselves, if that makes sense. So let's dive in. I'll dive into a little bit of the history about how I think we got here and what some of the implications for it, and really why I don't think women need to work for outside the home anymore. So to like kind of set the stage here, I think, and I'm going to refer to this like career feminism, girl bosses, like, I'm not talking about like the academic feminism. Like, I don't care how you define it. What I'm talking about is the idea that, like, in order for a woman to be successful, she needs to have a 9-to-5 career outside the home, be a quote-unquote girl boss, and make a lot of money, kind of just like men, and like bring her own, bring home the bread, bring home the bacon for herself. Needs to be financially independent, strong, making all the decisions for herself, ability to live on her own. So that's kind of what I'm talking about here. So to like set the stage here, like, I think girl bosses are overeducated and over leveraged, and I don't think that they're actually educated in the sense like they actually have learned things. Like, I don't think you could walk up to any girl boss and ask them to like distinguish Kant from Nietzsche, and I don't think they could do that. Not a single one of them has probably studied a philosophy class in their life, and that's basically like the foundation that underpins everything we do. So I don't think they're educated as they should be, but they're overeducated in the sense like they all have bachelor's, like master's degrees and JDs, and so they've gone to school, they've gotten all these credentials and degrees, and they think that makes them something, but at the same time, it's over leveraged them because they've taken on way too much debt. So I think it's like 50% of college campuses right now are women. And obviously those degrees, like, most of them aren't like taking on like computer science classes, learning how to build AI, right? They're in marketing and PR and business and advertising, and I was in the social sciences, so they're in the social sciences and humanities. And again, like, those things aren't inherently bad. I don't think like the social sciences and humanities are actually educating people, so it's kind of bullshit in my opinion, but that's a topic for another day. But you have these women who are going to college, they're taking on all this debt, and they're not getting the careers they need for it. Like, if you are like, okay, so I'm a writer, right? Like, I write, I see this all the time. So if I went to school to be a journalist, right, like, the only way to compete, I would need to go and get a master's degree in journalism, probably from a good school. Columbia's a good school for journalism. It seems to be a lot of people who are journalists from Columbia. So I would need to go get a master's degree, probably move to a city like New York, put in, my face time and hours doing internships and all that kind of stuff. And what do I get from it? I can tell you right now, like, there's a ton. Like, I just posted this on on Substack, but there was a position open at a university in Washington, D.C. for a writer/editor to work on the school's magazine. They required 5 to 8 years of experience, ideally at a newsroom. And it was paying about $75,000. Now, to give you some context, that's what I made when I left DC. I was making, my highest salary was about $73,000, working for a defense contractor. This was 2019. So inflation, costs have gone up. So basically, someone needs to have like almost 8 years of experience to get a job that's going to pay them $75,000 a year. And to get there, to be competitive, right, you probably have a master's degree because, you know, especially in the DC market, that's kind of how things are. So, like, you're not making enough money. Like, the jobs that these women are getting, like, they're not making enough money. And so, if you kind of peel back the curtain, it's like, okay, what do these women have to show for it? Like, they're not making the money. They're not in these high-profile jobs. They think they are. And so they've built careers for themselves with all these like flashy bullet points and like memberships and things on their resumes, but they have nothing else to show for it. Like, they're sacrificing families, they're not creating families. Like, you're not owning anything, right? Because if you're working for $75,000 a year in Washington, D.C., and you have a ton of student debt, like, you're not buying a house. Like, I can tell you right now, when I was living there, and I babysat for a bunch of families on Capitol Hill, like, their row houses, I think, were like 800. I looked at a couple of them on Zillow, and this was, 2015, 2016, 2017. Their row houses on Capitol Hill were about $800,000. So I have no idea what they're at now. But I can tell you right now, these girl bosses aren't buying homes. They don't have the credit, they don't have the assets, they don't have the income. So like, they have nothing to show for their lives beyond bullet points on their resume. And so what has happened is women aren't actually finding financial freedom. They're not getting the ROI that the feminists, the career feminists who came up at like third wave 1970s feminism, told them they were going to get. They were like, okay, go to school, get an education, go get a job, and you'll be free and liberated and you can do all this stuff. And that's not happening. Like, what people don't realize is women have traded families for careers, and now they're trapped in the exact same rat race that men are trapped in. And instead of being dependent on a man for your livelihood, you're not dependent on an employer who, oh, by the way, can unemploy you at any point in time. And this happened to me twice. I worked for a couple different contractors when I was in DC, and 2 out of 3 lost the contracts I was on. And so I wasn't like fired, but I wasn't like, they don't call it layoffs there. Like, it's just, they didn't win the contract, and because my salary was paid through the contract, like, the companies didn't have money to pay me, so they let me go. Like that's just how it works. And so that happened to me twice. And so, like, that also contributed to me leaving my career, because there was no actual job security. Everyone's like, oh, defense contracting is great, there's job security. No, there's not. There was absolutely no job security whatsoever. And so, like, okay, you're saying that women who stay at home, women who raise a family, women who depend on a man are at risk, but how is that any different than the risk you're facing living on working a 9-to-5 job for a single employer, relying on their paycheck? Like, at any point in time, they can unemploy you, and if you're not paying attention, like, that's not a good position to be in right now. A lot of people, highly skilled people, are having trouble finding work. So, I think it's worth thinking critically about this. So let's dive in. How exactly did we get to this point? The first thing I want to dismantle is the myth that women have never worked. And it's this idea that, like, women, like, there's this myth that our grandmothers were oppressed, they were kept inside the home, they weren't allowed to work outside the home, and as a result, like, feminism liberated them from this. And that's not true. Like, women have always worked. There has never been a woman who hasn't worked. It's just the definition of what work is has changed over time, which again is important because we're in this period of great disruption right now, where AI is changing what the meaning of work is. So, like, none of this is new. The thing I think that we don't understand, or we've like lost context of, is that during the post-war period, right after World War II, like, we saw tremendous change in culture and society and in the economy. Like, things took off in a way they hadn't before. And so, one of the big changes was culture. And so, before the war, people received, experienced culture through newspapers, and they would go to the movies, and they would listen to shows on the radio, but it took time for ideas to travel. After the war, TVs became more ubiquitous in the household, which meant sitcoms and new forms of entertainment were formed to play on those, right? And so you have the introduction of characters like June Cleaver, who portrayed an idealistic version of what a housewife should be, what a good woman should be. So we started learning. So in the past, books would fill this void, right? You would read, Pride and Prejudice, and that would tell you what a good woman should be. And now all of a sudden it was more instantaneous, it was visible, it was tangible, it was something you could view on a TV screen. And so that changed women's perception of themselves. And much the same way for my generation, Photoshop changed the standards of beauty, right? I grew up with, magazines, and they were photoshopped, and I thought people were, certain types of figures were beautiful because, that's what, models and magazines had told me were beautiful, but they were photoshopped, so it wasn't actually real. So in much the same way, in the 1950s, the expectations of what womanhood should be weren't based on reality. And so I think women weren't unhappy. Sure, abuse was happening, and I'm sure PTSD from the war probably had a role to play in that. There were definitely cases where women were not in good situations, but I don't think it was as many women as feminists want us to believe. And so I don't think women were trapped in their homes, couldn't do anything, were stuck in the suburbs, and their husbands were coming home at night and beating them. I think they had these ideas of what their life should be, and they couldn't meet the expectations of what both Hollywood and advertisers on Madison Avenue were telling them their lives should look like. And I think that was a source of deep dissatisfaction and a perception of oppression that didn't always, that didn't really exist. So women weren't necessarily trapped inside their homes in the way we think they were. Women worked, it's just the role of work changed over time. And so up until, the war, women played a supporting role. Women, hunter-gatherer times, women were supporting the gatherers. They learned to hunt, though. They were teachers, right? We forget this, but skills are passed down from generation to generation because the women and the mothers raised the children and taught skills to them. Kids learned to farm in part because they were working alongside their fathers in the fields, but also because women were part of the education part. Women were teaching them. So it's just so silly to think that women didn't play any role. They were teachers, and a lot of them too were hired as governesses by really wealthy families. And so women were fundamental, not just to literally procreating the next generation, but to educating them and giving them the skills they needed to survive. So without women, none of us would be here today. Women are the linchpins of survival of the human race, and we have seemed to have forgotten that. And so what changed was, I think, Industrial Revolution changed some things, right? So women started working outside the home, and in part because they had to, right? Because I've written about this. You can feel free to go on my Substack, and I have a class I created with ChatGPT called History of Modern Economic Thought, and I dive into this here. But whenever you have growth in a society, inequality follows. And so through the industrialization and when feudalism ended, a lot of farmers were displaced, a lot of serfs were displaced, so women kind of had to start going to work, and a lot of them were sought by employers and factories because they were cheaper. They could be exploited, basically. So women worked before the war because they were easy to be exploited, and a lot of them in poor and impoverished families had to work. So if you worked before the war, it was kind of a sign that you kind of came from poverty. Or, and I don't say that too, a lot of wealthy households hired servants and stuff. So you were a personal service. If you watch Downton Abbey, you've probably seen this, but you provided personal services to wealthy people. So you worked, but and you provided for yourself, but it wasn't this girl boss thing we have now. Work was very different. But I think the war changed that because women for the first time were forced, like no one shipped women off to war. They weren't drafted. They weren't fighting on the battlefields of, you know, in Iwo Jima or in Europe. So instead, they were sent to the factories, and I think they happily did. They wanted to support the war effort, and that's where, you know, Rosie the Riveter comes from. But they worked in factories, and so for the first time, like, you have these groups of women who were young, didn't have families. The men had been sent off to war. You know, the Depression just happened too, by the way. So keep that in mind. Like, they had just spent like a decade in deep poverty, and so they were working during the war. For the first time, they had like disposable income that they could spend it on whatever they want. And then all of a sudden, there's this pent-up demand after the war, and there's this mass consumerism where for the first time, like, you could actually afford things. Like, you could earn an income, you could afford things, and you know, it was easy to access. And so you have like this new culture that emerged where, you know, June Cleaver on Leave It to Beaver is creating like a perception of reality, and like you're seeing this like mimicked across like your neighborhood, because all the other moms have these new gadgets and gizmos and like widgets, and like you want the latest vacuum and you're trying to keep up with the Joneses. The keeping up with the Joneses myth kind of comes into play during this time. And so like your sense of self and worth is based on like consumerism and the ability to keep up. And like you had experienced, a lot of women experienced work during the war, so I think there was this belief that like working for a wage was able to like alleviate some of the pain associated with like not being good enough, or like the myth of consumerism, or the myths around consumerism that emerged after that emerged as a result of new forms of media. Alright, I had to change my spot real quick. I've been trying to record from coffee shops because I find it fun, and there's like someone who sat down next to me and was like super loud, so it was hard to focus. Anyways, okay, so I think consumerism changed things, and it changed women's expectations of themselves, kind of what they needed and how they found satisfaction. And so for them, like, earning money became like a means to an end. It wasn't necessarily like an essential, I would say, but like everything kind of fit together and created this new culture where like working outside the home became more desirable, and it, like, you know, kind of like I was saying before, it like helped them meet the needs of an imagined reality shaped by advertisers, by the way. Like, a lot of this is shaped by advertisers in an effort to sell products. But so I think there's like this, I mean, it kind of is like a psyop if you really want to think about it. Like, this idea that we need to buy things to make ourselves better, like, that's not new. That's been existing for decades now. And so like I think they were caught up in this psyop, and they were able to like saw work as a means to that end without realizing it. And I think too, you know, I kind of put this in here, I think too, another reason why women may have felt unsatisfied with their lives in the suburbs is because they stopped doing things for themselves, and they started like buying into mass consumer culture and like having all these appliances. And like, I don't want to say this to be like, okay, we should all go back to like hand washing clothes. I'm not saying that. Like, obviously some of the things that were invented during this time, you know, dishwashers, washing machines, refrigerator, like more expansion of like refrigerators and vacuums and household appliances, like, yeah, that's a good thing, because up until then, like, homemaking, being a housewife was like a full-time job, because it took a lot of time to do these things. But what I'm saying is, like, the more like we started like relying on consumer products to meet our needs, the less fulfillment we got out of our lives. And it created like this cycle where we had to like buy more, and it continues to escalate. Like there's this escalation effect where like whatever satisfaction you got before has become neutralized, and so you need more of it. Like, this is why like drug addicts, right? Like, they have to increase their dosage, because at some point, like, your body becomes immune to whatever dosage you're at, so you need to keep doing more and more and more and more. And I think that happens with consumerism and culture. And so I think what happened was like women stopped doing things for themselves and they stopped getting satisfaction, and so they needed to buy more of the thing to get the satisfaction, and the only way to get more of the thing was to like start working for themselves. And because they weren't like living up to the expectations that Hollywood had set for them. All right, I had to pause that for a second because like two dudes just came out and like just literally stood next to my table and were like yelling at each other. I forgot what I was saying. Anyways, like I think consumerism pushed women to like need more resources that they weren't getting from their husbands to buy more things, because that's what consumerism does. It needs us to buy more things, and so they saw education and employment as a way to do this. So I think it's all part of this like kind of bigger psyop. So the question is like, so okay, that happened, and then there was a lot of like political disruption in like the 60s and 70s, political and economic. So there was a push for equality, especially racial equality. So we saw that with desegregation in the South and like equal rights movement. But then at the same time in the 70s, the economy, the post-war economy collapsed. So in 71, Nixon took us off the gold standard. Shortly thereafter, you know, the OPEC embargo drove up oil prices, and energy is a foundation of any modern economy. So when that went up, you know, costs went up, inflation went through the roof. You saw a period of stagflation during the 70s. And so like I think we look for causation sometimes, and things are more coincidental than causative. Like I think it was just like you had this pent up frustration with housewives in the 50s and 60s that suddenly found an outlet through the pursuit of racial equality and the changing economic conditions. And I think they like kind of saw an opening to start pushing women to like leave the home and seek the financial freedom they were, and the financial autonomy is a better word, autonomy they were looking for. And so like women started more and more going to work outside the home in like around the 70s and the 80s. And again, like I don't know how much of a benefit this was to women, right? Like I think some may have benefited, sure, but like in the aggregate, you had a massive increase of labor in the economy. So the supply goes up, right? And so when you have greater supply than you have demand, like prices fall. So the labor rate like fell because you had more workers. And just like in the 19th and 20th centuries, like employers saw this as a cost-saving opportunity because women are willing to do work for cheaper. You know, we're kind of easy to take advantage of, I think. We're not as strong and independent as we think we are. And so I think, you know, there was a cost-saving opportunity here. And so you know, as this was happening, you know, the economy fundamentally shifted, like wages declined, you know, men weren't able to support families anymore on a single income, and there's some other like macro stuff happening here, like of course devaluation of the dollar has a lot to do with it too. But anyways, like things happened in the 70s where women needed to work outside the home. You couldn't really support a family on a single income anymore, but at the same time there was like this social expectation that arose where like women should work outside the home. So it wasn't even just like a necessity anymore, it was like they should do this. Like it kind of like womanhood slowly became redefined around this idea of having a career, having an education, and that this was what women should do. And that's why feminism is an ideology, and that's what ideologies are all about. They're prescriptive. They say this is how the world should be, this is the actions you should take in order to like fulfill the tenets of this ideology. And so like women were told to like go work outside the home, and so like they found their social value from that, and women want to belong. Like I think that's evolutionary biology there. Like we want to be part of the tribe, because historically if you weren't part of the tribe, like you died. And so I think women like found themselves into corporate America as a way to adapt and belong. And what, you know, has fundamentally impacted us is that the thing that was supposed to liberate us from the home, like this, having a 9-to-5 job was cast as this thing that was supposed to liberate us and free us of like a tyranny of oppressive men and patriarchy that didn't really exist. It was kind of our own beliefs about ourselves and how we should be women and what the role of womanhood looked like in the 50s and 60s, right? Like all these myths emerged, and like a job was supposed to liberate us from that, and instead it's left us without the resource we need to realize our independence, and that's money, because we took jobs away from men. Like employers saw us as a cheaper alternative. They could pay us less, like, and we're still making less than men. And it's not because like the patriarchy is like, oh, you're a woman, I'm gonna pay you 84 cents, well I'm gonna pay this man $1. It's because, like I was saying before, we take easier jobs and we take lower value jobs, like laying tar or like building houses or like maintaining power lines has far more value to society than like running Instagram ad campaigns. Like, I'm sorry if that hurts, you know, someone like a recent college grad who studied marketing and, you know, got a 4.0 and all that stuff, but like that's kind of the reality. Like, it's, your degree is worthless. And I say this as someone who, like, I prided myself in my GPA. I thought it was great. Like, I studied Arabic after college, I lived in the Middle East, like I had this awesome resume, and it was utterly worthless. And so, like, yeah, getting slapped with reality kind of sucks, but you know, that's kind of what it is. And so we don't have the thing, like women don't have the thing, the money we're supposed that like these jobs are supposed to give us. And so, like, we're not able to like buy assets for ourselves and create financial independence. Like, we're just changing dependency from a man to an employer. Okay, and so why does all this matter? So we sacrificed, so we moved into job world, we started taking jobs, left the home, 9 to 5. Having children and raising a family became more difficult, obviously, because like women aren't in the home, like you don't have anyone to care for your children. And so, you know, dependency on daycare went up, and babysitters. There's a lot of studies that have been done that show like correlation between like mom not being in the home and like the success of the kids. And I honestly think, like, you know, my mom worked part-time when we were, you know, younger, and I think that helped. Like, I have fond memories of going to the library in the middle of the afternoon, probably when I was like, you know, 4 or 5. We had a half-day kindergarten when I was in kindergarten, so yeah, probably up until like age 5. Like, I wasn't in school all day long, and like, yeah, like my parents did work, but like there was a period of time where my mom wasn't a full-time worker, and that's kind of what I'm getting at here. Like, if you want to raise a family, if you want to have kids, there's going to have to be a period of time where you're not working 9 to 5, like where 40 hours a week, 50 hours a week, commuting to a corporate employer and putting in a full work week, like, just isn't possible. And women haven't been willing to concede to this. They think that they can just like have both, and like, you're not able to do both well. You can either have a really good career and no family, or a family and like a career you're content with, but like you're not going to be, you know, an editor at Condé Nast, or you're not going to be like Secretary of State while like you have young kids at home. And that's just like the reality of it. Like, kids need mothers. Like I was saying before, like, mothers nurture, mothers teach, mothers pass on information. Like, biologically, like, kids need their mothers, and we're not giving them mothers because we're going to work all the time. And so this has created a new problem where, because the cost of outsourcing motherhood, the cost of outsourcing motherhood has become so expensive, young people aren't having kids. And so you've probably heard about like Elon Musk and some other like folks talk about population collapse, and that's actually a huge problem, because if you're not, and this is like the crazy part of all of this, like the very people who are promoting feminism and careers and all this, like, their ideology is going to die out because they're not creating the next generation to like carry the torch on. Like, in a generation or two, like, no one's going to be left to fight for feminism because the only people producing children are anti-feminists. So like, that's kind of the like dark irony here. But yeah, like, you need to procreate, or like you don't exist, like you stop existing basically. And so like, younger people have stopped that they're just like opting out of producing children. They're not, Gen Z and millennials, and they're citing high costs. And like, okay, again, if you're trying to pursue a career as a Condé Nast editor and you're working in like Manhattan and you live in Brooklyn, like, yeah, like the math doesn't math there. You're not gonna be able to raise a family. Where I come from, where I grew up, like there are still houses available for less than $100,000. There are tons, like, and this is a whole separate conversation, but like young people depopulated small towns, moved to big cities in search of careers that don't actually exist and don't really matter. And so you have all these like single women who aren't starting families living in cities and like struggling with the cost of living, but you have all of these like underpopulated small towns who like need talent and need kids. Like you have schools that are closing because there just aren't enough kids anymore. But there's like all these opportunities in small town America, and thanks to the internet, like it's not hard anymore. Like you don't need to like be physically present somewhere to have a good career. Like you can have a good career and telecommute and like work remotely or start a business, and I'll get into that towards the end. But you can do all that easily. And so the fact that like we're complaining about the cost of living, it's just it's a function of choice at this point. But anyways, young people are choosing not to have families, not to start families, and so the trade-off is because of the cost of childcare. And so this is why I want to argue that I don't think women should work outside the home. And again, like if you want a career, if you really don't want to have children, and like you really do want a career, like you do you. Like stop listening. This isn't about you. This is about like everyone else who like maybe actually does want children, but feminists have told them that no, you shouldn't have children, or like maybe actually really do hate their jobs and like want to go back to like cooking and baking and like having coffee dates with like other mothers and like doing things that our grandmothers used to do, because frankly that's like more enjoyable than slaving away in a cubicle farm for 40-50 hours a week. So this is for those women. And so here's the trade-off here, and here's why women should if you do want a family, if you want a family and like you hate your job, like here's the trade-off and why women should stop working outside the home. So this is a TikTok of a guy who went viral because he and his wife were looking at daycare for a toddler and a newborn. And according to this guy, I think he's in Florida, Jacksonville, Florida, he said it would cost $4,495 a month in order to outsource childcare to a daycare center so his wife could work. Now, the math on that doesn't math anymore. So like, unless you are a legit girl boss and you're making enough money to like justify working outside the home and having someone else raise your kids, like it just doesn't make sense anymore. Like women really shouldn't. If you have a family, or you want a family, like you're better off financially staying at home and raising your kids. There's a piece I'll link it's called Race Feminism by Michael Woudenberg. It's fantastic, but really like you have to start doing the math here and figure out like what's worth it. So to give you an idea, the median household income is $80,000 a year after taxes, which I think is important to take into consideration. For someone here in Austin, Texas, it's about a little less than $65,000 a year. So that's the actual cash that's hitting your bank account, not what's being withheld from taxes. So like forget about your salary. The only thing that really matters is your after-tax income. Smart Asset has a really good calculator that you can use to like calculate what your take-home income should be. I'll link that as well in the description. I think that's a really useful tool. So I asked like ChatGPT to like just come up with some expenses. These are not accurate by any means. I think there's like some things that are off here, especially like if you're dealing with $4,000 a month in childcare. Like, this is woefully off, but just a general estimate. Like if you're a dual income household with 2 kids in a city like Austin, like how much does it cost to live? According to ChatGPT, it's about $75,000 a year. So if the median household take-home income is around $65,000 a year and it costs $75,000, like do the math, like you're not coming out ahead. You're not coming out ahead. And a large portion of your cost is going to be childcare, right? So like basically you're paying someone else you're either not having children and you're setting yourself up for failure and misery in the future, or if you are having children, you're paying someone else to raise your children and you're not actually coming out ahead. Like, if you make, if you're making $5,000 a month in take-home pay as a woman and $4,400 a month is going to daycare, like, you're not actually making any money. Like, you're not bringing anything home. Like, there's no, I mean, I guess if you're making like $12,000-$15,000 a month, okay, sure. Like, at that point, hire a nanny. But like, you're not bringing home any money. You're not like actually bringing home any income. And if you don't, I mean, maybe you're a dual income, no kids household, that's one thing. But if you're like a single woman who's like not dating, not married, not having kids, like, you're not happy. And we know this because more and more of you are medicated at increasingly alarming rates, and you have mental health crises. So we know you're not happy. But you're also like bearing 100% of the cost of living yourself. So like, you have no partner to split the cost with. You're probably living in a small apartment that you can barely afford. But you're not going to be able to like trade up housing because you're not building equity in anything. So you're kind of just like stuck. And so, for what? So like, you're not coming out ahead either. Like, even if you don't have kids and you're not paying for childcare, I don't know that you're coming out ahead. Like, look at the rents in like New York. If you're trying to be a Condé Nast editor, girlboss, like Madison Avenue corporate executive, and you're paying $5,000 a month rent for an apartment in New York, like, you're not coming out ahead. So like, you're not having kids, you're not starting a family, you're not in a relationship with anyone, and you're like living alone, and you're not coming out ahead. You still have student loans, like rent is absurd. So like, just like do the math. I think that that's what this gets down to. Like do the math here. Like, does your 9-to-5 job pay enough for you to cover your costs? If the answer is yes, like, and you're happy, like you're genuinely happy, like, you do you, continue on. The majority of people, I'm gonna say, is probably no. So like, you need to reprioritize. So maybe having a spouse to like share expenses with, maybe that's not a bad thing. And if you have kids, like, maybe staying at home to raise your kids, like, also not a bad thing. And so this is why I think like women need to leave the workforce. I'm not like saying, go back to the kitchen and slave away all day. I'm saying, like, do the math. Like, women have always worked. That's not abnormal. So you're still gonna work. You're not gonna sit at home all day watching soap operas or Netflix or whatever. Like, you're not gonna be idle. You're gonna be doing stuff. It might not be compensated, but you're still doing work. It's not gonna be compensated by an employer, but you're still doing work, right? You're still contributing. And if you're raising kids, like, you're literally raising the next generation that's gonna like build society. So you are contributing. You might not be able to afford all the things you want, but most of that is a psyop to get you to spend money anyways, a consumerism psyop. So like, maybe you don't really need those things. Like, I don't know, like, no one really needs $200 Lululemon leggings. Like, there's a ton of secondhand shops where you can buy them for like $40, $50 if you need them. eBay, it's a great tool. So you don't really need the things you think you do. So if you deflate your lifestyle, like, suddenly, like, you can survive on a lot less than you think. And if you have a family, which, this gets into, the existential question we're facing with AI of proliferations, like, what does it mean to be human? So like, if you have a spouse and a family, like, you have something that AI can't replicate. Like, you have a thing that makes you human. Like, working your job doesn't make you human. For a lot of people, it's a means to an end, and that end is raising a family. And so I think like motherhood and family needs to come back into being important and like dignified. I think we need to like re-dignify motherhood and families, because with women losing jobs to AI, like, and because they're not creating anything for themselves beyond their resumes, like, what do you have? Like, what do you have to compete with AI? like like if you don't have kids and family, like you don't really have anything to compete with men like that they would want. And so like what happens when AI starts taking over? Like seriously, like I know people will find this offensive, but God, you've got to really start thinking about these deep questions, because this is the crux of it, right? This is the crux of it. Like, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be a woman? And what is our role in a society moving forward where careers are no longer like the foundation of our lives? And this is where I think feminism has failed us. So, yeah, basically, like, we're all stuck with this debt for educations that we weren't really educated on. We're just like kind of cogs in a machine. We're working for employers. We're stuck like in this rat race, like chasing paychecks just like men. We're taking the one thing that we're like fundamentally unique and valuable at, and that is creating life and raising it, and we've totally like disregarded that and diminished it. So like I think our priorities are messed up, and I think like we need to reconsider the value proposition of corporate America. Again, if you're a successful girl boss, you have enough money in the bank and you're happy, fine, you do you. Most people aren't you. Most women are not you, and most women should not follow the same path you did. So I think women need to rethink the possibility of leaving corporate America. But I want to end this by saying I don't think that women necessarily need to stop working. Again, like, we've been working all the time. We're not going to be like idle, trapped in our houses, like only raising children and have nothing else for our lives. Like, thanks to technology, like, you can do almost anything. Like, how many women and working moms have very profitable side hustles on Etsy, or their coaches or their influencers? Like, I'm writing here on Substack and making income doing that. Like, that you can be a personal assistant to someone or a virtual assistant. Like, you can do almost anything thanks to the internet. All you need is a computer and an internet connection. And I'm like, okay, yeah, maybe you might need to wake up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning to get work done before your kids are up. Like, okay, like, there's going to be trade-offs. It's not going to be easy. I'm not saying this is going to be easy, but it is doable. And lots of people are doing it. They're just not like blasting their lives on social media for you to see. Like, tons of women are doing this. So I think that the solution is women need to return to the home. We need to reprioritize motherhood. And we need to build new ladders for ourselves. And they don't necessarily need to be a career ladder, but something where like we can still earn our own money. We can still like buy things we want to buy. We're still contributing to our households, right? We're not necessarily like trying to out earn our husbands or spouses, but like we're still contributing. Like, we're doing things, we're working, but we're just not doing it in the way that like 9-to-5 corporate culture tells us we need to do it, and we're not doing it in the way that feminism tells us we need to do it. Like, we're constructing something bespoke and unique for ourselves, and it's going to look different from person to person. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think that's liberating. Like, the freedom to design your life however you want to live it, like, that's the freedom. And like, that's kind of what I've done, and that's why like I'm wanted to talk about this, is because like I left my 9-to-5 in 2019. I've had part-time gigs, and I did have a short full-time stint for a few months in between there, but like for the large part, like I've been working for myself ever since then. And no, it's not easy. Yeah, it can be stressful. Like, right now a lot of freelance work has dried up, so like, yeah, it's super stressful. But would I rather have stress I've created than stress that's been imposed on me by a boss? Absolutely. Like, my life is night and day from what it was when I had my 9-to-5 job. And because I have structured life like this, I have a lot more flexibility than I had before. And so like, I'm still like working through like the social deconditioning, right? Like, I'm saying all of this, but like I'm still working through, for myself, like, okay, like a 9-to-5 job isn't the most important thing. Like, I'm a more well-rounded person than that. It's not, the entirety of my identity. So yeah, like, even I'm still struggling with this, but I think women have more options than we realize, and the freedom comes from like designing a life you want to live around your values and your priorities, not taking the life that is being imposed on you by the feminism. Because at the end of the day, the patriarchy wears Prada. Like, let's be honest here. Like, they're the ones who have been oppressing us the entire time. It's been women, not men. So yeah, if you found this helpful and you're like, whoa, this is really insightful, I would appreciate if you would subscribe. This kind of, helps me build this up. I'm trying to do more of this stuff, so I would appreciate it. And if you have thoughts or anything to add, feel free to drop your thoughts in the comments. All right, toodles.